Now, are South African women more at risk of ante and postnatal depression? Well, July is Mental Health Awareness Month, and the World Health Organization recently releasing a study saying a South African woman's risk of ante and postnatal depression is 4 times higher than the global average. According to the study, about 40% of women in the country suffer from this condition. Well, let's chat now to Cathy Mkone, a clinical psychologist at the South African Depression and Anxiety Groups, and Pharma Dynamics spokesperson Nicole Jennings. She'll be joining us from our Cape Town studios. Ladies, thank you both for your time. Maybe let me begin here in Johannesburg with you, Charity. Ante and postnatal depression. Speak to us about the difference of these two types of depression. What are they?
All right, so antenatal is prior to the woman giving birth. It might be some depressive symptoms or symptoms of a major depressive episode or major depressive disorder that a woman who is expecting a baby or is just about to give birth experiences. Then postnatal depression are some of the symptoms of depression that the woman would then experience post or after giving birth to the baby.
Nicole, when it comes to the figures that we're watching from the World Health Organization and just our understanding of depression more broadly, how are, firstly, South African women affected by depression, and how is our society perhaps a bit more broadly affected before we come back to the actual facts and figures of the postnatal and the antenatal depression?
Okay, so the study found that particularly people living in lower income communities tend to be at higher risk for these natal depressions. You know, in most developing countries, the rate stood at about 20%. But in South Africa, we see shockingly that we've got double that. It's 40% for pre- and postnatal depression in South African women. And contributing factors there could likely be the high rate of poverty in the country, the fact that we struggle with intimate partner abuse, and also the high incidence of HIV and AIDS. You know, the South African Police Service's 2017 report indicated that 1 in 5 women in South Africa experience intimate partner abuse. So, you know, these factors will definitely have an impact on the natal depressions.
And let's talk about then the symptoms of either one of these depressions and what they look like.
So the symptoms become more pronounced postpartum, so once the woman has given birth. The symptoms are as depressive symptom or depressive symptoms of major depression. So it would include things like low mood and lack of appetite, change in sleeping patterns, concentration, also feelings of suicidal or sometimes even homicide. So feeling like harming yourself or the baby. And it's important to distinguish between baby blues. So baby blues is something that happens straight after a woman has given birth, which is not as severe. So the symptoms, some of the symptoms that would be there for postpartum depression or postnatal depression also present. But it usually lasts for a week or 2 and it resolves quite easily.
Okay, so what are baby blues?
All right, so baby blues is the feelings. I mean, any woman who's given birth can attest to the fact that it changes their lives quite drastically. So the nature of postpartum depression as well as baby blues is that there's a change in chemical, social, as well as emotional functioning of the new mom who's just given birth. So those are some of the changes that come, and it affects majority of women who have just given birth. And it resolves quite quickly, even without the intervention of a mental health or health practitioner. Whereas for a diagnosis of postpartum or postnatal depression, it has to be those symptoms. So the things I mentioned, like loss of interest in activities that you found pleasure in, lower libido, concentration problems, problems with eating, problems with sleeping, irritability, a low mood, and that should persist for 2 weeks or more.
But
after
you know,
the birth
I'm
of the baby.
listening to some of the symptoms that you're talking about, and they are quite broad. You know, it could be a number. If you're stressed, you could face some of those symptoms. So at which point do perhaps partners, family members, do they need to get involved and say, hey, this might be something bigger than just, you know, not feeling hungry or not feeling like going out, whatever the case might be?
Yes, that's very correct. Hence the distinction between baby blues and a postnatal depression. Because if it's for diagnosis to be warranted, these symptoms need to affect the mother's activities of daily living. So it needs to impair her ability to take care of the new infant quite significantly, as well as the ability to take care of herself, like to attend to her very basic everyday needs of living or everyday activities of living.
All right. Nicole, as we're talking about some of these symptoms, what they entail and what they would mean for a woman who's experiencing this, you talked on the societal ills and the issues that basically women have to confront in their lives day to day. Now, at which point does perhaps the inability of a mother move beyond just perhaps very dire poverty situations to actually, and trying to run away from the reality of that, to actually becoming a mental illness problem?
Yes, certainly. And the societal issues around mental health, and especially the natal depressions, is still a massive issue. In many cases, you know, these women don't speak up and they don't ask for the help and the support that they need because, unfortunately, depression is still very stigmatized in South Africa, and especially in lower income communities where the risk of developing natal depression is so much higher. So we always actually recommend, if you do go and you see a psychologist or a psychiatrist and you are going to ask for help, take your partner or your caregiver or your support structure with you so that they can also sort of listen to a healthcare professional unpack the condition a bit more. This just helps to sort of destigmatize, you know, depression and to help people to understand the seriousness of the condition, and again to draw that distinction between what is just considered baby blues or something that can just be dismissed as, you know, a condition that can be treated without medication or without counseling, and lending a bit more weight and making sure that that mother receives the care that she needs, and also making sure that the infant is protected in terms of the mother's ability to care for that infant, and to engage in the very important activities of nourishing the child, making sure there's regular sleeping times. All of these things can be impacted if the mother doesn't get the help and the support that she needs to take care of the child.
You know, when you talk about the support that women need during this time, and you look at the demographic which it affects, these are mothers that would not necessarily have access to highly specialized care. So when you talk about a psychiatrist or a psychologist, many of these women would not have access to such services. So what are the immediate interventions or places of help that they can go to?
Yes, you're 100% correct. We have a severe shortage of mental health professionals in the country. The reality is that 80% of the South African population is dependent on the public healthcare sector, where, it is a challenge to get access to basic primary healthcare needs. So what Pharma Dynamics has done, just to sort of try to bridge this gap, is we've developed an online platform called Let's Talk, and the URL to access this platform is letstalkmh.co.za. And what we do here is we make a range of educational materials available where psychiatrists and healthcare professionals unpack the different mental illnesses a bit, just so that people can access these trusted resources that have been developed by healthcare professionals. And we've also created a bit of a community platform where other people that have struggled with a similar condition can sort of share their story, their experience, and just talk about mental health a bit more to start the conversation and to start destigmatizing these conditions. There are also videos available where psychiatrists unpack the conditions, but ultimately it's always advised for a patient to take the step towards seeing a healthcare professional themselves, getting specialized treatment for their condition specifically, especially because, you know, with the natal depression, certain medications can be harmful to the infant if you're breastfeeding or if the infant is still in utero. So it's important to, to access a psychiatrist or a doctor who can prescribe medication that's safe for you and that can support you.
Let's talk about access, Charity, and you are with the SADC group, and so what are the barriers to access, especially for women, that prevents them from seeking seeking further help?
I think the major thing is seeing it as an illness, particularly with mental illness or mental health care in general. A lot of people don't see it as something that is a worthwhile illness that someone can actually go and seek help for it. And I think that's the biggest stumbling block to people even speaking out or coming out and identifying themselves, or even family members and people around them identifying that this is an illness. So people, like Nicole mentioned, stigmatize a lot of these conditions. So it's a matter of people saying, oh, just snap out of it or you'll be okay, without actually realizing and acknowledging that, like any other ailment or anything else, it is an illness, and it is something that can be treated and something that warrants attention from a mental health care practitioner.
And of course, the burden on mothers. I mean, I've read a number of articles over the years just of the anguish that women go through because they want to change the way that they feel, but they somehow are just not able. And in a family context, then they already, you know, as a mother, you have the burden of having to live up to the expectation of raising this child, but now you can't even stand the child, and so it can be quite a difficult thing to break through. So for those women who are suffering with suffering from this kind of depression, what advice would you have for them?
I mean, certainly the pressures for motherhood, particularly for new mothers, is immense from society, from the things that you see in pictures and in the media. So I think the biggest thing is for the guilt to be removed, that it is an illness, that every mother who gives birth, well, most mothers who give birth, do have the desire to bond with their babies, to enjoy the stage of motherhood or the stage of life that they find themselves. It's very important to remove the guilt from it and understand that it is an ailment, it is an illness, it is something that needs professional help and needs professional attention, and that can be cured. It's something that can be treatable, something that can be brought under control, that it's not the mother's fault, and to remove the guilt from that, because it is something that is affecting the mother just as much as it's affecting the baby and everyone else around the mother.
Nicole, just our last parting shot with you. What are the interventions that that families, that partners, and I think just society at large can have in place, especially to support women who are suffering from this kind of depression when they do know about it?
I think the first thing to do is to understand that speaking out and saying, I need help for these women, takes a lot of courage. It takes bravery to take that first step. And if this step is met with judgment, or they feel that they are being stigmatized as a result of asking for help, we are just perpetuating this problem in society. So the main thing to do is to be supportive, to sort of to support that person, and once they speak out and say they need the help, assist them in getting the help that they need. Another thing that we must highlight is the fact that medication for mental health is still sometimes stigmatized. Oftentimes women feel like a failure because they have to take medication to cope with their mental health condition. I mean, one wouldn't feel like a failure for taking medication for high blood pressure, for example, but mental health medication is still stigmatized, and it's also important not to make people feel like, taking medication for a physical problem that could be caused by neurotransmitters or by hormone imbalances in the body is something that should be viewed as making them feel inferior.
All right, thanks for your time today. Charity Mkone, a clinical psychologist at the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, and Pharma Dynamics spokesperson Nicole Jennings, and they've been chatting to us about antenatal and postnatal depression. I certainly hope that you've learned something from our discussion.